I'm Vanessa, 30 female. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in a city that feels both too big and too small at the same time, and I work as a senior accountant for a mid-sized firm. For most of my life, I've been the responsible one, the quiet observer in a family that always seemed to revolve around my older sister, Erin. This is the story of how the two words she used to define me my entire life, unwanted mistake, almost cost me everything, and how my parents' blind devotion to her pushed them to the brink of financial ruin. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, my world was defined by a single, crushing narrative. I was an accident. My parents, Jennifer and Harry, had my sister Erin when they were young and full of dreams. She was their planned masterpiece, the sun around which their universe orbitated. 8 years later, I came along, a surprise my mother once tearfully confessed was the result of a careless evening. That carelessness echoed through my childhood in the form of my sister's favorite insult, a phrase she wielded with surgical precision: unwanted mistake. It was her go-to weapon in any argument. If I got a better grade on a test, she'd sneer, "Doesn't matter, you're still just the unwanted mistake." If I made a new friend, she'd whisper to them at the first opportunity, "You know she was an accident, right? Mom and Dad were done having kids." The words were meant to isolate me, to remind me that my very existence was an imposition, a deviation from the perfect family plan. And for a long time, it worked. I became quiet, introverted, and eager to please, hoping that if I was good enough, helpful enough, and invisible enough, I might somehow earn my place. My parents never directly confirmed Erin's taunts, but their actions spoke volumes. Erin was showered with praise, opportunities, and endless financial support. Her dream of becoming a marketing guru, which later morphed into being an influencer, was funded without question. Her first car, her first apartment deposit, her countless failed business ventures, all were bankrolled by Mom and Dad, who saw her as a brilliant, creative force who just needed a little more time to find her footing. She was 38 now, still hopping between freelance gigs and living a life that looked glamorous on social media, but was propped up by our parents' savings. I, on the other hand, was the practical one. My decision to become an accountant was met with quiet relief. It was a stable, sensible career that required no financial investment from them. I paid my way through college with scholarships and student loans, worked part-time jobs, and secured a position at a good firm right after graduation. I was financially independent by 23, a fact I was immensely proud of, but one that my family simply saw as my duty. Vanessa was the responsible one; she could take care of herself. Erin was the creative one; she needed their help. The only person who ever seemed to see me for who I was, not for the circumstances of my birth, was my grandmother, Rebecca. A retired librarian, Grandma Rebecca was a woman of quiet strength and profound kindness. Her apartment, a cozy, sunlit space filled with books and the scent of Earl Grey tea, was my sanctuary. It was where I went after a particularly cutting remark from Erin, where I studied for my exams, and where I confessed my deepest fears and dreams. She saw the hurt in my eyes that I tried so hard to hide. One afternoon, when I was about 16, I came to her in tears after Erin had told my first boyfriend that I was a charity case my parents pitied. Grandma Rebecca held me as I sobbed, her hand gently stroking my hair. When my tears subsided, she looked at me with an intensity that I'll never forget. "You, my dear Vanessa, are not a mistake," she said, her voice firm. "You are a gift. Some of the best things in life are the ones we didn't plan for. Don't you ever let her make you feel otherwise." From that day on, she made it her mission to build my confidence. She taught me how to bake her famous lemon meringue pie, helped me with my scholarship applications, and celebrated every single one of my achievements with genuine, unadulterated joy. She was my rock, the one constant in a family dynamic that often felt like shifting sand. As she got older, her health began to decline. By the time she was 85, she was mostly confined to her apartment, a place she adored. It was a beautiful pre-war unit in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood, and she owned it outright. It was her nest egg, the one significant asset she had to her name. We all knew it was valuable, but to me and Grandma, its worth was measured in memories, not dollars. During one of my weekly visits, about a year before everything imploded, she brought up tea. He apartment, we were sitting at her small kitchen table, sipping tea. "You know, this old place is going to be yours one day, Vanessa," she said casually, as if commenting on the weather. I almost choked on my tea. "What? Grandma, no, you can't be serious. What about Aaron?" She waved a dismissive hand. "Aaron has been given everything her entire life. She wouldn't appreciate this place. She'd sell it in a heartbeat to fund her next fleeting passion. You, on the other hand, you understand its value. You see the home, not the price tag." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I've already made it official. My lawyer has it all drawn up. This is for you, my dear, a place to call your own, a foundation for your future, a promise." I was overwhelmed, touched more deeply than I could express. It wasn't about the money, it was about the sentiment. It was the ultimate validation, the final, irrefutable proof that someone in my family saw me, chose me, and loved me without reservation. It was a promise sealed with a lifetime of love, and it became my most treasured secret. I never told my parents or Aaron. I knew it would cause a firestorm, and I wanted to respect Grandma's wishes and keep it between us for as long as she was with us. I didn't know then that this beautiful gift, this symbol of my grandmother's love, would become the catalyst for the most painful and destructive chapter of my life. The year following Grandma Rebecca's declaration passed in a haze of bittersweet moments. Her physical health was a gentle, steady decline, but her mind remained as sharp as ever. Our weekly visits became daily. I'd stop by on my way home from work, bringing her groceries, helping her with bills, or just sitting with her as she recounted stories from her youth. We never spoke of the apartment again, but it was an unspoken understanding between us, a quiet current of love and security that flowed beneath every conversation. It was our secret, a bond that Aaron's jealousy and our parents' obliviousness couldn't touch. During this time, Erin's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Her career as a brand strategist was a series of dramatic highs and lows, mostly lows. She would land a short-term contract, spend the money lavishly on designer clothes and extravagant brunches for her social media feed, and then fall into a slump, complaining that no one appreciated her genius. These slumps invariably ended with a tearful phone call to our parents, who would once again dip into their retirement fund to send her a loan she never had any intention of repaying. I tried to talk to them about it once. "Mom, Dad," I said gently over dinner one Sunday, "don't you think you're enabling her? She's almost 40. She needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet." My mother, Jennifer, sighed, her expression a familiar mix of worry and defensiveness. "It's not that simple, Vanessa. The creative world is tough. She has so much talent, she just needs a break." My father, Harry, a man of few words, just grunted in agreement. "Your sister feels things more deeply than most. We have to support her." It was a conversation I'd had a dozen times, and it always ended the same way, with them defending Aaron's irresponsibility and me feeling like the cold, unfeeling one for pointing out the obvious. They saw my stability not as a strength I had built for myself, but as a lack of the passionate, artistic temperament they so admired in Aaron. They couldn't see that her passion was a cover for a complete lack of discipline and a staggering sense of entitlement. The inevitable happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. I got the call from the nursing home where Grandma had been moved for palliative care a few weeks prior. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep. The grief was a physical blow, a hollow ache in my chest that took my breath away. She was more than a grandmother to me. She was my anchor, my confidant, and my fiercest protector. The funeral was a somber affair. Erin, ever the performer, delivered a dramatic eulogy that was more about her own feelings of loss than Grandma's life. She sobbed theatrically, clinging to our father, while I stood silently, the depth of my own grief too profound for public display. My quietness was, of course, misinterpreted. "Look at her," I heard Erin whisper to a cousin. "Not even a single tear. It's like she doesn't even care." The storm broke a week later. We were all gathered at my parents' house to go through some of Grandma's personal effects: photo albums, old letters, and trinkets. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Erin had been dropping hints all week about her plans for Grandma's place. She spoke of renovations, of flipping it for a huge profit, of using the money to finally launch her own lifestyle brand. It was all I could do to keep my face neutral, holding onto the secret promise Grandma had made me. The family lawyer, Mr. Davison, had called me a few days after the funeral to confirm that the will was clear and that the deed to the apartment had already been signed over to me 2 years ago. It was an ironclad transfer of property. He advised me to tell the family soon, but I was terrified of the inevitable explosion. I decided this was the moment. Taking a deep breath, I set down a stack of photo albums. "Mom, Dad, Erin, there's something I need to tell you about Grandma's apartment." 3 pairs of eyes snapped to me. Erin's held a look of smug anticipation, as if she was expecting me to announce that I'd help her clear it out. "Grandma, she left the apartment to me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Silence, the air crackled. My mother's face went slack with shock. My father blinked, confused. Erin's face, however, was a terrifying spectacle. The smugness vanished, replaced by a dark, contorted mask of pure rage. "You're lying," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm not," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She signed the deed over to me a couple of years ago. It was her wish. She wanted me to have a place to call home." "A home?" Erin shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "She promised me that apartment. She said it was my inheritance, my fresh start." This was a blatant lie, and we all knew it. Grandma had never been anything but wary of Erin's financial recklessness. "Erin, that's not true," my mother said softly, finally finding her voice. "Your grandmother never said that." "She did," Erin insisted, turning her fury on our mother. "You're just taking her side. You always do. You've always resented my talent and tried to hold me back, and now you're siding with the unwanted mistake against your own daughter." The words, so familiar and so cruel, hit me like a physical blow, but the shock of her turning on our mother was even greater. My father stood up, his face pale. "Erin, that's enough. Do not speak to your mother that way." But Erin was beyond reason. She was a cornered animal, lashing out with venomous, baseless accusations. She claimed Grandma was senile, that I had manipulated her, that I had taken advantage of a frail old woman. She painted me as a conniving, greedy monster who had stolen what was rightfully hers. And the most heartbreaking part? I saw the flicker of doubt in my parents' eyes. They knew Erin was lying, but her hysteria was so powerful, her victimhood so absolute, that it began to warp their reality. They looked from her, sobbing and screaming, to me, quiet and steadfast, and they didn't see a liar and an honest person. They saw a daughter in immense pain and another who was, in their eyes, the cause of it. The argument ended with Erin storming out of the house, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. I was left in the wreckage of her tantrum, looking at my parents, who refused to meet my eyes. The promise that had been my greatest comfort had become a declaration of war, and I was about to find out just how far my family would go to fight for their golden child. The days following the explosive revelation were a masterclass in psychological warfare, orchestrated by Erin with my parents as her willing puppets. She refused to speak to me directly, instead communicating through a barrage of manipulative texts and tearful phone calls to our mother and father. The narrative she spun was consistent and devastating. I was a thief, a cold-hearted manipulator who had preyed on a vulnerable old woman to steal her inheritance. My attempts to reason with my parents were met with a wall of emotional deflection. "Vanessa, you have to understand, your sister is just devastated," my mother would say, her voice strained. "Her heart is broken. She truly believed Grandma wanted her to have that fresh start." "But Mom, that's not true," I would plead. Grandma was of perfectly sound mind. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to be secure. Security? You're an accountant with a stable job, my father chimed in, his tone accusatory. You don't need it. Your sister, her career is more fragile. This money would have been life-changing for her. It was a maddening, circular argument. My responsibility was being used as a weapon against me. Because I had made sensible life choices, I was deemed less deserving. Because Erin was a financial train wreck, she was entitled to a multi-$100,000 bailout. Their logic was so twisted, so warped by decades of coddling Erin, that they couldn't see the profound injustice of their position. The true betrayal, the one that cut deeper than Erin's manufactured rage, came about 2 weeks later. I was at work, trying to focus on a complex audit when my cell phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was strangely formal. Vanessa, your father and I need to see you, she said. Can you come over for dinner tonight? We need to talk. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Is everything okay? We just need to talk, she repeated and hung up. The dinner was one of the most agonizing experiences of my life. The three of us sat at the familiar dining table, the silence punctuated only by the clinking of silverware. My parents exchanged nervous glances, while I pushed a piece of chicken around my plate, my appetite gone. Finally, my father cleared his throat and placed his fork and knife down. Vanessa, he began, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking, and we've spoken with Erin at length. And, I asked, bracing myself. We believe a mistake has been made, my mother said, picking up the thread. We don't think your grandmother was in her right mind when she signed that deed over to you. She was elderly, and you were spending so much time with her. It's possible you unduly influenced her. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. They were echoing Erin's lies verbatim. You can't possibly believe that, I whispered, my voice trembling. You knew Grandma. She was sharp as a tack until the very end. Grief can cloud a person's judgment, my father said, his voice gaining a false, paternalistic confidence. And frankly, it's not fair. You and Erin are both our daughters. You should share in your grandmother's legacy. Equally. I stared at them, my mind reeling. Share it? What are you talking about? It's not a pile of cash, it's a home Grandma gave to me. It's an asset, Vanessa, my father said coolly. A very valuable one, and Erin is prepared to take legal action to contest the will and the deed transfer. I felt the blood drain from my face. Legal action? On what grounds? On the grounds of undue influence and questionable competence, my mother said, her gaze finally meeting mine. There was no warmth in her eyes, only a grim resolve. She has a case, and we are going to support her. I waited for the punchline. It had to be a threat, a tactic to scare me into giving in, but it never came. My father leaned forward, his expression hard. We are mortgaging this house to pay for her legal fees. The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. I couldn't breathe. I looked around the room, the living room where I took my first steps, the kitchen where my mother taught me to bake, the walls that held every memory of my childhood. They were going to leverage all of it, their entire life's work, their financial security in retirement, to fund a frivolous, malicious lawsuit against their own daughter on behalf of the other. You would do that? I asked, my voice cracking. You would risk your home for this, for her lie. We are doing this for our daughter, my mother said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. We are doing this to make things right. In that moment, everything became terrifyingly clear. It wasn't about fairness. It wasn't about what Grandma wanted. It was about placating Erin, their golden child, at any cost. My entire life, I had been the unwanted mistake, the one who had to be sensible and self-sufficient so that all their resources, emotional, financial, and otherwise, could be poured into the black hole of Erin's ego. They were willing to sacrifice their own future and destroy their relationship with me to maintain that toxic dynamic. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. I looked at my parents, at these two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I saw strangers. Their faces, once so familiar and comforting, were now masks of betrayal. "I see," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I see where I stand. You've made your choice." I walked out of the house without another word, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of our family. The cool night air felt like a slap, waking me from a 30-year-old dream. The promise Grandma had given me wasn't just about an apartment anymore. It was about my own self-worth, and I would not let them, or Aaron, take that from me. The fight was on, but I was no longer fighting for a piece of property. I was fighting for the truth, and for the memory of the one person who had always believed in me. I was fighting for myself. Leaving my parents' house that night, I felt like I was walking away from a plane crash. Everything was a blur of shock and a deep, gut-wrenching pain. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just the lawsuit, it was the fact that my parents were financing it. They were placing a tangible bet, mortgaging their home and their future, on the belief that I was a liar and a cheat. The unwanted mistake had finally been served with an itemized invoice for her existence. The next morning, I received a formal letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. It was cold, official, and full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. Erin was suing me. She was contesting the property transfer on the grounds of testamentary incapacity and undue influence, claiming Grandma Rebecca was not of sound mind and that I had coerced her into signing the deed. The letter demanded that I immediately cede 50% ownership of the apartment to Erin to avoid a costly and protracted legal battle. My hands shook as I read it. This was real. This was happening. Erin, with our parents' full financial and moral support, was trying to legally dismantle my grandmother's last wish. My first instinct was to call Mr. Davison, Grandma's lawyer. He had overseen the deed transfer and was a witness to her state of mind. His reaction was one of weary indignation. "I was afraid this might happen, Vanessa," he said, his voice kind but grave. "Your sister made some noise right after the will was read, but I didn't think your parents would actually back her on this. It's a baseless claim." "But can she win, Mr. Davison? They're mortgaging their house. They must think she has a real shot." "People can be convinced of anything when they're desperate," he replied. "And this lawsuit is an act of pure desperation. Your grandmother was sharp, lucid, and very, very clear about her intentions. We have records, medical opinions from her doctor at the time, and my own sworn testimony. The case is frivolous, but that doesn't mean it won't be expensive and emotionally draining to fight." He was right. The initial consultation with my own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, laid out the stark reality. Even with an ironclad case, the legal process would be a marathon, not a sprint. Erin's lawyers could file motions, request depositions, and drag the process out for months, maybe even over a year. Each step would cost money. A lot of money. Sarah estimated my legal fees could easily reach $30,000 to $40,000, perhaps more if it went to a full trial. I felt sick. I had savings, a respectable nest egg I had diligently built since I started working. But it was for a down payment on a future home of my own, for emergencies, for a life I was trying to build. The thought of pouring it all into a legal battle born of my sister's greed and my parents' delusion was nauseating. This was their gamble. They were betting that I wouldn't have the financial or emotional stamina to fight back. They assumed I, the ever-practical Vanessa, would do a cost-benefit analysis and decide it was cheaper and easier to just give in and give Erin half. They were leveraging my responsible nature against me, assuming I'd fold rather than risk my savings. For a few days, I wavered. The weight of it all was crushing. I would lie awake at night, the what-ifs circling in my head. What if I just sold the apartment and gave them half the money to make it all go away? What if I just walked away from it all? But then I would see my grandmother's face in my mind, her kind eyes, her firm voice saying, "This is for you, my dear. A foundation for your future." This wasn't just about money or property. It was a fight for my own integrity. Giving in would be admitting that they were right, that I was the manipulative cheat they painted me to be. It would mean letting Erin's lies rewrite my grandmother's truth. I couldn't do it. With a heavy heart and a firm resolve, I told Sarah to fight it. "I'm not settling," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'm not giving them a single penny. We fight this with everything we have." The first casualty of this decision was my savings account. I transferred a significant chunk of it to Sarah's firm as a retainer. Watching the balance on my account plummet was a physical pain, each dollar representing a small piece of the future I had been working so hard for. The second casualty was any remaining shred of a relationship with my family. My parents stopped calling altogether. The silence from them was more deafening than their accusations. It was a confirmation of my exile. I was officially disowned, cast out for daring to defy the family's narrative. The legal process began, and it was as ugly as I had feared. We entered the discovery phase, where both sides exchange information. Aaron's lawyers requested years of my financial records, my phone records, and correspondence between me and my grandmother. They were on a fishing expedition, desperately searching for any shred of evidence that I had manipulated her. They were trying to build a case that I had either accepted money from her in a suspicious way or isolated her from the rest of the family. It was an invasive, humiliating process. Strangers picked through the most private details of my life, looking for anything they could twist into something sinister. Mean. While I was paying thousands of dollars a month for the privilege of defending my own character against these baseless attacks. The strain began to take its toll. I was exhausted, anxious, and struggling to focus at work. The legal battle was a constant, humming stress in the back of my mind. But with every bill I paid, with every condescending letter from Aaron's lawyer, my resolve hardened. This was a desperate gamble on their part, but it was one they were going to lose. I had the truth on my side, and I had my grandmother's promise. I would honor her memory and her gift, no matter the cost. I just had to hope that the truth would be enough. The legal battle dragged on for 6 grueling months. It was a slow, painful grind of paperwork, depositions, and mounting legal bills. My savings account, once a source of pride and security, was now a ghost of its former self. I had cut back on all non-essential spending, living as frugally as possible, but the legal fees were relentless. My parents, I learned through the legal correspondence, had successfully taken out a second mortgage on their home for $100,000. A staggering sum that represented their blind, unwavering commitment to Aaron's cause. Aaron, meanwhile, seemed to be reveling in the drama. Her social media, which I tortured myself by looking at occasionally, was full of vague, passive-aggressive posts about family betrayal, fighting for what's right, and the struggles of being an artist. She was portraying herself as a noble victim, a creative soul crushed by a greedy, materialistic relative. It was a performance, and her followers were eating it up, leaving comments of support and encouragement. She was monetizing her manufactured victimhood, while I was liquidating my future to defend myself against her lies. The turning point came on a dreary Wednesday afternoon. I was at my lawyer Sarah's office for a strategy meeting. We were preparing for the depositions, where I would have to answer questions under oath from Aaron's lawyer. Sarah was reviewing the mountain of documents we had received from their side during discovery, emails, bank statements, and phone records from Aaron and my parents. They're building their entire case around this undue influence narrative, Sarah said, tapping a thick file on her desk. They're trying to prove that you systematically isolated Rebecca from the family in her final years to get your hands on her main asset. But that's insane, I said, the familiar frustration rising in my throat. I was the only one who consistently made time for her. They barely visited. Aaron only ever showed up when she needed money. I know, and we have your grandmother's visitor logs from her assisted living facility and phone records to prove it, Sarah said calmly. But we need more than just defense. We need something to dismantle their credibility completely. We need to show that this lawsuit isn't about justice, it's about greed. She leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful look on her face. They've provided years of Aaron's financial records, hoping we'd find something to support their case. But I think they've made a critical error. They've assumed we'd only look for transactions between you and your grandmother. Sarah leaned forward again, her eyes alight with a spark of discovery. I spent the last 2 nights going through every single credit card statement and bank transfer Aaron has made for the past 5 years. It's a mess of impulsive spending and debt, as we expected. But I found something else. Something they clearly didn't think we'd look for. She turned her computer monitor towards me. On the screen was a spreadsheet she had created, with highlighted lines of text. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of recurring charges. Every month, like clockwork, a charge to a place called Vantage Storage Solutions. I looked at the screen, confused. A storage unit, so what? So, Sarah continued, a slow smile spreading across her face, I did a little digging. Vantage is a high-end, climate-controlled storage facility. Not the kind of place you'd rent for a few old boxes. It's expensive. And Aaron has been renting a large unit there for over 4 years. I still don't get it, I said. What's in the storage unit? I don't know for sure, Sarah admitted. But look at these other charges. She pointed to a series of large payments to luxury furniture stores, art galleries, and high-end electronic retailers, all dated within the last 2 years. These don't match up with anything in her current apartment, which, according to our private investigator, is a small, sparsely furnished rental. She's been buying expensive things, but she has nowhere to put them. The pieces started to click into place in my mind, forming a picture that was both absurd and deeply unsettling. Sarah continued, laying out her theory. Your parents have been funding her lifestyle for years, our analysis of Thay. Our bank statements shows regular, large transfers to her account, labeled as loans. Aaron was taking that money, and instead of using it to build a business or pay her bills, she was buying luxury goods. She wasn't just living beyond her means, she was stockpiling assets. She was so confident that she would get your grandmother's apartment that she had already fully furnished it in her mind and in reality. All of that expensive furniture, the art, the electronics. It's all sitting in that storage unit, waiting for the home she was sure she was entitled to. I stared at the screen, speechless. It was the ultimate embodiment of her entitlement. She hadn't just hoped for the apartment, she had banked on it, spending tens of thousands of dollars of our parents' retirement money to furnish a home that was never going to be hers. This is it, Vanessa, Sarah said, her voice filled with a new energy. This is what we use to destroy their case. We subpoena the records for that storage unit. We get an inventory of what's inside. In her deposition, we will ask Aaron, under oath, what she spent our parents' money on. We will ask her about her business expenses. And then, we will present her with the evidence of a storage unit filled with designer furniture and art. We will show the court that this lawsuit was never about a senile grandmother or a manipulative sister. It was the desperate, final gambit of a spoiled child who had already spent her inheritance before she even had it. For the first time in months, a genuine feeling of hope bloomed in my chest. It was more than just a legal strategy. It was the key to exposing the truth. Erin's greed, her breathtaking arrogance, had finally led her to make a fatal mistake. She had left a paper trail, and we were about to follow it all the way to the end. The deposition was scheduled to take place at a neutral law office, a sterile, impersonal space that felt like the perfect setting for the final act of my family's implosion. I sat on one side of a long, polished mahogany table with my lawyer, Sarah. Across from us sat Erin, her own lawyer, and, to my surprise, both of my parents. They weren't required to be there, but they had come to offer moral support for Erin, a united front of delusion. Erin was dressed in what I assumed was her idea of a serious, professional outfit, a severe black blazer and her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked pale and nervous, but she shot me a look of pure venom as she sat down. My parents, Jennifer and Harry, positioned themselves in chairs against the wall, like spectators at a gladiator match. They wouldn't look at me. The deposition began with Erin's lawyer questioning me. It was a tedious, repetitive exercise. He asked the same questions over and over in slightly different ways, trying to trip me up. Did Grandma ever seem confused? Did I ever handle her finances? Did she ever mention wanting to help Aaron? I answered each question calmly and truthfully, sticking to the facts. My regular visits, our conversations, Grandma's clear and unwavering state of mind. After 2 hours, he ran out of questions, having failed to land a single blow. Then it was Sarah's turn to question Aaron. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Sarah began gently, establishing a baseline of facts about Aaron's career and financial situation. Aaron's answers were vague and self-aggrandizing. She spoke of being a creative consultant, of multiple income streams, and of the volatile nature of project-based work. Then, Sarah moved to the money from our parents. "Ms. Miller," she began, using Aaron's married name she rarely used. "Over the past 5 years, you received approximately $150,000 from your parents, correct?" Aaron shifted uncomfortably. "They were loans to help me invest in my business." "I see," Sarah said, making a note. "And can you provide some examples of these business investments?" "Well," Aaron stammered, "there was software, marketing materials, networking events, the usual costs of running a consultancy." "So you didn't, for example, spend $50,000 on designer furniture, art, and a home entertainment system?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously soft. Aaron's face went white. Her lawyer shot Sarah a sharp look. My parents in the corner leaned forward slightly. "Of course not," Aaron said, trying to sound indignant. "That would be completely irresponsible." "Irresponsible," Sarah repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "So, to be clear, under oath, you are stating that you did not purchase these items with the loan money provided by your parents." "That's right," Aaron said, her voice a little too loud. Sarah paused, then slid a thick document across the table. "In that case, could you please explain this? This is a court-ordered inventory of the contents of your climate-controlled storage unit, Unit 7B, at Vantage Storage Solutions, which you have been renting for the past 4 years." The color drained completely from Aaron's face. She stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. Her lawyer snatched it up, his eyes scanning the pages with growing alarm. Sarah pressed on, her voice like ice. "The inventory lists, among other things, a Roch Bobwa sofa valued at $12,000, a complete Eames lounge chair and ottoman, multiple original paintings from the Griston Gallery, and a top-of-the-line Bang & Olufsen sound system. The total estimated value of the contents is well over $60,000. Ka. And you tell us, Ms. Miller, what business purpose these items serve while sitting in a storage unit." Complete silence. Aaron opened and closed her mouth like a fish, but no sound came out. My parents were staring at her, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Isn't it true, Ms. Miller," Sarah continued, her voice rising with prosecutorial fire, "that you were so certain your younger sister, the unwanted mistake, as you've called her, would be disinherited, that you took your parents' retirement money and went on a shopping spree to furnish an apartment that you were never, ever going to get?" Aaron's composure shattered. She looked wildly at her lawyer, who was staring down at the inventory, his face grim. He knew the case was over. Then she looked at my parents, her eyes pleading. "It wasn't like that," she whimpered. "It was an investment. Good furniture holds its value." But the lie was too absurd, too transparent. My mother let out a small, wounded gasp. My father buried his face in his hands. The truth was finally out, not because of my testimony, but because of Aaron's own receipts. Her greed had laid her bare. Sarah wasn't finished. She turned to the core of their legal claim. "You've accused your sister of manipulating your grandmother, a woman who, by all accounts, was mentally sharp and astute. But isn't the truth that you are the manipulator? You manipulated your parents into giving you their life savings, and you manipulated them into financing this cruel and baseless lawsuit, all because you couldn't stand the thought of your sister receiving a gift you felt you were entitled to." Aaron finally broke. She let out a strangled sob and dissolved into hysterical tears, muttering, "It's not fair, it's not fair." Her lawyer quickly put a hand on her arm. "This deposition is over," he said curtly. He and my parents huddled with a weeping Aaron in the corner of the room. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the body language told the whole story. The lawyer was shaking his head. My father looked broken. My mother was staring at Aaron with an expression I had never seen before, not of sympathy, but of profound, gut-wrenching disappointment. 2 days later, Sarah received a call. Aaron was dropping the lawsuit. The day of reckoning had come, not with a dramatic courtroom verdict, but in a quiet, sterile office where a stack of receipts had spoken louder than a lifetime of lies. The lawsuit was officially withdrawn, but the fallout was only just beginning. The silence from my family was absolute. I half expected a phone call, an apology, an explanation, anything. But my phone remained silent. It seemed the shame of being so thoroughly exposed was too much for them to face. A week after the deposition, I received a package in the mail. It was a large, padded envelope with my mother's familiar handwriting. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. Inside, there was no letter. There was only a single, framed photograph and a check. The photograph was one of my favorites, a picture of me and Grandma Rebecca taken on her 80th birthday. We were both laughing, our heads closed together, the picture of pure, uncomplicated love. The check was for $45,000, the exact amount I had spent on legal fees. There was no note of apology, no admission of guilt, just the photo and the check. It was a silent, pathetic peace offering. They were trying to pay for their betrayal, to reduce the immeasurable pain they had caused to a simple transaction. I looked at the check, at my father's signature on the bottom line, and I felt nothing but a cold, hollow pity. They still didn't get it. They thought money could fix what they had broken. I deposited the check. It was my money, a reimbursement for a war I never wanted to fight. But I didn't feel any sense of victory. The money replaced what I had lost financially, but it couldn't touch the deeper deficit they had created. About a month later, I finally moved into Grandma's apartment. The first few days were strange. The space was filled with her presence, and I felt a profound sense of both grief and gratitude. I walked through the rooms, touching her books, sitting in her favorite armchair, and looking out the window at the view she had loved for so many years. This was her gift. This was the foundation she had wanted for me. Slowly, I began to make it my own. I painted the walls, bought new furniture, sensible, affordable furniture, and filled the space with my own life. It became my sanctuary, just as it had been when I was a child. It was a home built on a promise of love, one that had survived the ugliest of storms. I heard snippets about my family from a cousin. My parents had to sell their house. The second mortgage, combined with the money they had given me, had left them financially ruined. They had downsized to a small rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. Their retirement dream was gone, sacrificed. The altar of their favorite daughter's greed. Aaron, my cousin said, had disappeared from the family's life. The shame of what she had done and what she had cost our parents was apparently too much for her to bear. Her social media went dark. She had, in the end, gotten what she deserved, nothing. But her downfall had taken our parents with her. One day, about a year after I had moved in, my mother called me. Her voice was small, hesitant. She asked how I was, how work was going. The small talk was excruciating. Finally, she got to the point. "Your father and I, we miss you, Vanessa," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We made a terrible mistake. We were so blind. Can you ever forgive us?" I listened, and the anger I had held onto for so long began to fade, replaced by a quiet sadness. Forgiveness felt like a distant, impossible mountain. How do you forgive a betrayal that fundamental? "I don't know, Mom," I said honestly. "What you did, it changed everything. You chose her lie over my truth. You have to live with that choice, and I have to live with mine." My choice was to build a new life, one not defined by their expectations or Aaron's cruelty. My choice was to honor my grandmother's legacy by living a full, happy life in the home she gave me. I have my own family now, not one of blood, but one of choice. A close circle of friends who have been my unwavering support system. They are the ones who celebrate my successes, who listen to my fears, and who love me for who I am, not for what I can provide them. They are my proof that family is not just about the people you are born to, but the people who show up, who believe in you, and who would never, ever ask you to justify your own existence. The unwanted mistake found her place. She found it in the quiet strength her grandmother instilled in her, in the integrity she refused to sacrifice, and in the sun-drenched rooms of an old apartment filled with books, memories, and the promise of a future she had built for herself.